When you receive your wheelchair, it will probably come partially assembled. It may come completely in pieces. It may come completely assembled, depending on shipping and whether I'm hand delivering it or couriering it. Either way, it's good to know how to assemble and disassemble it. So if it does come completely disassembled, it is quite easy to assemble. There are various bolt holes all over, and almost everything is an M4 nylock nut and an M4 bolt. There are 3 different lengths. There is the 12mm, the 16mm, and the 20mm bolts, all M4s. The M6s are only used in the wheel axle, and there's an M6 nylock nut here. These are all replaceable, and you can find at any of your local hardware stores. So if, for example, one gets stuck in and you can't get it out, don't worry, you can just buy another one from your hardware store. I do usually send spares. You will also receive an Allen key to help you assemble the bolts. Now, if it does come in pieces, the first place to start is by putting the elbow unit onto the side of the frame. I find it easier to put your custom nameplate, if you want to, or if it was supplied with one, to slide that on first. Once it's in place, the nuts tend to get in the way. So the bolts tend to get in the way. So it's easier to put that on first. You can slide up and down a little bit just to get clearance when you're working. Now, take your 16mm, that's the middle length M4 bolt. Load those in the top 2 holes just a little bit. There you go, quite nicely with the fingers. I need the Allen key at the end. I have already placed the nylock nuts into the U-frame. They can be quite tricky to get into the U-frame, so I usually put them in for you. Once that's all lined up, I can just tighten them a little bit with the fingers and then use the Allen key to finish it up. These are standard sizes, there's nothing special about them. If you have an electric screwdriver or drill, you're welcome to use that. I do, but I do ship them with an Allen key so that you can make any adjustments without needing power tools, and all you really do need to assemble these is just the supplied Allen key. Although when it comes to moving the nuts around in the struts that hold the wheel, a small hammer is quite helpful, but it isn't necessary. Okay, that is nice and tight. The next thing is to put the arm that sets the length for your patient. Now what I like to do is, before I actually go and put anything in position, I actually put this on the patient and I line the center of this up with the center of the hips, where the femur is going down. Try and guess where you think that the hip would hang down naturally, and have the middle of that hip be the middle line here. From there, I can then hold this up and set this to about the position of the front of the shoulders, base of the neck, as far forward as possible. There is room to adjust exactly where the harness attaches with these small holes, so it doesn't have to be perfect. But in time, I'm sure you'll find after a few uses you may want to make small adjustments forward and backwards, and that's just fine. I've gone and preset some nylock nuts in here, but there is a trick to getting these in. Whenever you're trying to fit the nylock nuts in these holes, it's quite a tight fit, they always go askew and you can never get them in. So if you take your Allen key and you press your Allen key in the nylock nut, it's a nice snug fit, holds it beautifully. You can then line it up, it holds it straight, and using a fingernail it pops in beautifully. And you can also use a nylock nut, the Allen key, to wiggle the nylock nut out again. Works really well. So nothing special. If you try to do that with a bolt in there, you can often damage the threads, but the Allen key just hugs into the little nylock ring in there, so it works beautifully. That's pretty easy. Right, Like I said, I've already set those up. I already know where they're going. So I will hold those in roughly the right position. I will now take the 12mm long M4 bolt. That's the shortest one that you were supplied with. Start to screw that in. Once it starts to stick out the other side, I can hold this up there and screw that in the rest of the way. Right, and do the other one. Because this is set up for quite a short patient, I have spaced the bolts right at the front and the back of the elbow. It's not really essential, you can do however you feel is best, but the arm is printed with thinner material than the rest of the frame, so it does flex quite nicely, and I actually like to encourage that flexibility. So it really, you can figure out what works best for your patient. And if you want to use 4 bolts in there, you can go for it, but really 2 is all that is necessary and all that I ever use. So that is now that set up. Once that is in, you'll see now that it's not so easy to move the nameplate on and off because those heads are now sticking in the way, which is exactly why I clipped it on first. It can be forced on afterwards, but it's better to do it first. Right, now the strut. This is what the wheel attaches to. These two are reversible, they can be placed the other way around. I like to have it with this facing forwards because being able to put the wheel in a more forward position reduces the weight on the front legs. Okay, that's a bit of a tight push into there. Once it's in there, the holes should line up perfectly straight away. You now take your 20mm long M4 bolts. I have already pressed the nylock nuts onto the inside, and these are a bit of a tight fit. They don't need to be too tight. They are held on the inside by the nylock nut and the bolt goes all the way through. So tightness really isn't the goal here. So just not too tight. You might put too much strain on the frame. Right, the next thing from here, I actually like to put the saddle on next. TPU is the flexible plastic we use. I print them as thin as possible to make it as soft as possible. Whenever you're printing with TPU, quite often you get these little strings. They're just, the stringing is very normal for TPU. It's quite an annoying little thing. Whenever it's new, there's lots of it. You just rub it with your fingers and it all comes off. Within a couple of uses, all of this will be gone. Sometimes there's little rough bits. You can just pick it with a nail and they tend to just pop off. So, and because it's printed thin, quite often there's little imperfections. These imperfections go away by printing it thicker. Then you've got a more stiff cushion here, which is going against what we actually want. Now, the saddle is supported by the girth. These two little arms slot in. You can put them in any way. I like to place it so that the little lip faces outwards, not inwards. But it actually doesn't matter. Right, do that on both sides. Once the girth is through the saddle, you can now attach it to the frame. Slide up through the holes on the inside. Start off just setting it sort of level with the base of the bar. Make adjustments later. On the outside, we'll go tuck them down back through there again. Lift them over the head of that bolt and pull it down so that that little bump tucks into the slot. We'll do the same the other side. Don't worry about exactly which hole they're in right now, because we're going to adjust that later. You'll make those adjustments with time as your patient uses it, and you figure out what works for you. But that's quite an easy adjustment to make, and they tend to hold on there quite snugly. Some of the TPU plastics are not as supple as others. This purple is lovely and soft, also means there's lots of extra stringing. Particularly the red color I find is a bit more rigid, and when the more rigid ones don't seem to lock in here as well. If you are struggling and you would like me to replace it with a more softer plastic in a different color, just let me know. Right, that is nice and locked in. We can easily set the height of that later. I don't think I've even done it evenly, but it doesn't matter. Right, the next thing, while on TPU things, I'll just hook the stirrups in. Any which way doesn't matter. I usually have it with a flared bit pointing outwards, but it really makes no difference. I do up through the outside, over and tucking down on the inside. Some people tuck it the other way around. You'll figure out what works for you. Up on the outside, over, down on the inside, locked in. Try to get those to be the same. Okay, right. Now, the last thing is to set the height of the wheel. This is something you're going to have to adjust and fiddle with time. You may not even want to put the nylock nut on the inside first time round. Put the patient in it, hold it up and try and figure out what height you want to set this at. When you figure out what height you want to set it at, go ahead and push that nylock nut in there. Again, you could use an Allen key or something else to try and guide it in so that it's straight. And these are a real pain to push in. Sometimes they can be quite tight. I find a small hammer works quite nicely to get these in. One thing I have seen that clients have done to cheat is they've done the nylock nut the wrong way. It actually works okay. And you put the rounded side in first, it guides it in quite nicely and it actually goes in really well. Technically not the right way to do this, but you know what? It actually works really well and they tend to hold really well. Right, I've set these in a guesstimated position. I always set it more forward to start off with. And that whole assembly just screws on there, as easy as that. Lock it in fairly tight. If you lock it in too tight, it'll put a bit of pressure on the bearings. That it's designed such that it shouldn't matter, because where it puts pressure on the bearings, it shouldn't over-tension them and should run smoothly. With time, that can wear a little bit, it's not a problem. In case this comes apart, there is a spacer that runs through there. There are two 608 bearings inside and a bolt whose head is buried in the plastic here. This assembly tends to not to come apart. If it does, it's not rocket science. I'm sure you can figure out how to put it back together again. Please excuse my wild cat running past in the background. Okay, the last thing to assemble is the harness onto the front of the frame. Make sure you have a tight fitting harness and attach the frame as far forward as possible onto the harness, as we've said. And I just use cable ties to attach that on in a position as far forward as possible. Even with the step in, I'll attach it onto the forward part of the ring, not the back part of the ring.